This is a soft tissue anatomy review of the wrist and hand with focus on the primary ligamentous supports for the disto-radial ulnar joints and the radiocarpal joints. The distal radial ulnar joint is anchored statically by the interosseous membrane between the ulna and the radius and anterior and posterior or dorsal and palmar ligaments between the radius and the ulna. There we go. So posterior and then an anterior ligaments between the distal ulna and radius. In addition, the triangular fibrocartilaginous complex, which we will discuss in more detail later, also supports the distal radial ulnar joint. The primary wrist joint, which is better known as the radiocarpal joint, is the articulation between the distal radius and the proximal row of carpals, specifically the lunate, scaphoid, and a little bit of the triquetrum. This articulation is primarily stabilized by the dorsal radiocarpal ligament, the palmar radiocarpal ligament, the ulnar collateral ligament, and the radiocollateral ligaments. These ligaments have been highlighted for you in green. Of particular note is that we oversimplify these ligaments by calling them ulnar collateral, radiocollateral ligament, and dorsal and palmar radiocarpal ligaments, when in fact they are individualized bands of ligament structures connecting the radius to the proximal carpal bones. More specifically, looking at the radiocollateral ligament seen here, this ligament, which attaches from the styloid process of the radius to the scaphoid and trapezium a little bit, limits ulnar deviation, and is tight during flexion and extension end ranges at the wrist. And on the ulnar aspect of the wrist, the ulnar collateral complex of ligaments here, which you can consider to be two parts, from the ulnar styloid process to the triquetrum and from the ulnar styloid process to the pisiform, limits radial deviation of the wrist. The dorsal complex of ligaments between the radius and the carpals is the only primary and major ligamentous structure dorsally, and it acts to help restrict wrist flexion. And then on the palmar aspect, the very broad and multi-segmented palmar radiocarpal ligament helps to limit extension and hyperextension of the wrist.